Hello everybody, in this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about CSS so you can turn your bland HTML into something beautiful. Get started with CSS. Let's first get started with what CSS is. A common misconception is that CSS is a programming language, but that is incorrect. CSS is actually a styling language which is used for modifying the appearance of the content of web pages. Just as HTML is used for the content of web pages, CSS is used for presentation of that content. Due to the fact that CSS is used for presentation and design, there are many ways to do the same thing. HTML, on the other hand, has set elements for most things, which means that there is usually only one correct way to do things in HTML. First, we need to discuss the syntax of CSS. Luckily, the syntax is straightforward and easy to understand. The first part of the syntax is the selector. There are many ways to use it. There are many different types and combinations of selectors, which we'll talk about later. But for now, all you need to know is that a CSS style starts with a selector to apply the style to. Next comes an opening and closing curly bracket that are used to denote the start and end of the styles that apply to the selector. Everything in between these curly brackets will be styles that are applied to the HTML elements that match the selector. Lastly, inside the curly brackets is one or more property value pairs. Each of these pairs defines a property such as color, font size, width, etc., and a value for that property. A basic example of the CSS syntax will be setting the text color of all H1 elements to blue. Now that we have the syntax out of the way, let's focus on the various selectors. Any HTML element can be used as a selector, and the style that is defined for that selector will apply to all HTML elements of that type. By far, the most common and useful selector is the class selector. The class selector lets you select HTML elements based on their class attribute, such as the href for an anchor tag. A class is just an attribute that all HTML elements can have and is used with CSS to distinguish elements for specific styling. The class attribute can also have multiple class attributes that can be used to distinguish elements for specific styling. All HTML elements can have multiple different classes in the same attribute as long as they're separated by a space. In order to select an element by class, we need to use a period before the class name as the CSS selector. This period tells CSS that whatever follows is a class name and not an HTML element name. Classes are the most common selector used because they are amazing for creating reusable components.